Today, I'm going to be talking about 10 issues with US-made guitars. What really sparked this video was, I own currently now 5 guitars that are made in the USA, that those companies either don't exist or don't make guitars in the USA anymore. And when I started looking at it as a whole, I thought, wow, this is really going to be the future. No more USA made guitars. So I thought, well, why is that? And that's what started, hey, let's make a list of all the things that may be causing the problem or is going to make the problem worse in the future. Now, before I get into this video, I'd like to say I'm going to be using some broad strokes here. What do I mean by that? I mean, not all companies have issues. In fact, some of you might go, hey, the company I like has never had an issue. Well, that's probably possible. In fact, some companies are probably going to be the worst at this and some companies are going to be the best. But generally, I wanted to talk about US manufacturers as a whole, and I thought, you know, maybe this is an interesting subject to talk about. So let's get started with number 10. They fail to offer a fair amount of left-handed guitars. This one has always confused me because when I go to US manufacturing facilities, they always tell us about how expensive it is to make left-handed guitars because you got to shut down the machines, retool, and I don't disagree with that. However, it seems like it would be easier for them to do it than the import manufacturers. Here's why. The import manufacturers have to do high volume to make any money. They're making a lot less per guitar and they're making a lot more of them, which means left-handed versions even get trickier. I once had a manufacturer tell me in the US that it costs about 30% more to make a left-handed guitar. Well, I would think that if I was a left-handed player, I would rather pay more than have no guitar to choose from at all. Number 9 is another generalization, but it's pretty accurate, which is a lot of US manufacturers tend to use the high desire rate of US manufactured guitars. In fact, the fact that we all want one so bad and they're so good, to use that to make import versions of them to sell them at a price point we can afford. Instead of holding true to, hey, we make the best guitars, they immediately kind of almost contradict themselves by saying, here's the import version of our guitar. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. Rickenbacker, Kiesel, Nags don't make any import version, to say a few of those. What's interesting to me is how many companies make an import version of their exact guitar. Even crazier than that, I've seen US guitar companies make a US guitar and then immediately start making the import before the American version was even popular. Number 8 is another weird one, which is they're riddled with failures. And what I mean by that is we tend to look at US made guitars as premium, the best. And really what that sometimes means is they're just the most expensive. But what I mean by the comment riddled with failures, I mean that it's almost implied if a guitar is made in the USA, it's perfect. However, most of the companies that build guitars in the USA have shaky histories, to say the least. Everything from finish issues to design flaws to defective merchandise to bad decision making has plagued all the guitars over the last few decades. And it's almost funny how we just give all that a pass and just say, well, if it's made in the USA, it's great. Number 7 is another strange one, which is they have limited colors and looks. Another thing that's always confused me about the US made guitars. You think that they would go ahead and go, we're gonna make all the exotic, exciting ones here. They're gonna be more expensive, but unique, and then we'll do import versions that are just more basic in how they look. But the reality is, when I look online and when I look in stores, a lot of times the import guitars are the most exciting when it comes to variety. In fact, some of the US manufacturers have kind of trimmed the color choices down to just a few. It's really interesting to kind of really maximize the profit they can on the limited runs. Number 6 is probably the most confusing one on the list for me. So many US guitars now have import parts on them. I'm supposed to value US made guitars because they're somehow more premium than import guitars, yet more and more of them are coming with pretty much only import parts on them. How am I supposed to value this as a consumer? Is it that I want the guitar just made here and it's all import parts, or do I want it all made in the USA? But one thing's for sure, we're definitely seeing a rise of import parts on US guitars to the point where some US guitars, I don't even know what makes them US other than they were either assembled here or they were maybe finished here. Number 5 is another hot spot for you guys, which is the US manufacturers are slow to add stainless steel as an option for their frets, even though the market seems to almost demand it. More and more high-end guitars that are not made in the USA are coming with stainless steel frets. Now, keep in mind there's a few exceptions. Kiesel guitars, Suhr guitars, of course, are a couple to mention. But as a whole, this issue is actually really blossomed out when Fender kind of teased everybody with the Ultimate Strats about how they were going to change the industry forever. And everybody's first assumption was stainless steel frets. Yet Fender doesn't offer stainless steel frets at all, which is, again, very strange considering it's one of the most common things I see see. In fact, whenever I'm reviewing any expensive guitar, the first comment you always see is, does it have stainless steel frets? And I'm not saying that's all important. In fact, to some players, it doesn't matter at all. But it's interesting that the US manufacturers seem to be the slowest to get it. Number 4 is my pet peeve, which is resale value. US guitars always get treated like, hey, if it's made in the USA, it's gonna have great resale value. But we see where that's not true all the time. There are tons of companies that are making guitars in the US where the resale value is not that great. In fact, not even as good as some import brands. It almost seems like it doesn't matter where the guitar is made, it depends on how popular the brand is to help the resale value. Now I know that's not the case, none of this is a fact, but it is interesting to see that it doesn't just mean made in the USA means a good resale value. You actually have to have the brand recognition behind it. Now number 3 actually came to me as an email from a viewer who said, do US companies rely on American pride to sell their instruments? Are they actually looking at the import guitar companies as competitors? And I actually think they're not. And here's what I mean by that. I think that a lot of US manufacturers, a lot of them, meaning not all of them, but a lot of them, rely on the fact that, yeah, they are a premium product that has high desire, and therefore that is what's going to drive their sales, but not looking at the fact that how good their guitar is versus another guitar either equal or less expensive that's imported in. Now, all I got to say to guitar manufacturers is ask the US car industry how that's worked out for them over the last 30 years, and I don't think you'll like the answer. Number 2 is low wages and crappy benefits. One thing that always kind of sets me afire, so to speak, in the comments, whenever I review a high-end guitar, there is always comments about being elitist, but when I review a low-end guitar, it's always talk about, hey, how come you don't value wages? And what's interesting is, having many friends that work at many of the factories in the US, I can tell you, none of them are making a great wage. This idea that they're making some kind of high-end industrial union wages that people used to making manufacturing products in the US is not really there. In fact, most of them basically live paycheck to paycheck. And that brings us to number 1, which is no investment in the future. When I look at US manufacturers, I don't see how they're trying to figure out how they're going to keep manufacturing here in the US. If it's so important that we buy guitars made in the US, how come a lot of the US manufacturers don't seem to look at the US as the future of their manufacturing? When I talk to US manufacturers as a whole, a lot of them constantly comment about how the import divisions are the fastest growing, if not the biggest divisions in the company. And I've actually had a US manufacturer tell me that eventually the future for them will just be import manufacturing. Now again, this is a broad stroke video, which means I wouldn't point it out if I didn't see it as, let's say, average or par for the course. Par for the course is most of the US manufacturers are not looking at staying in the US or concerned with it in the next 10 to 20 years. So there's my list, and if you have a comment, you can put it down below. Whether or not you like some of the things in the list, you disagreed, you agreed, I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to put. And as always, I want to thank you so much for spending some time today just listening to talk about guitars. And until the next time, know your gear.